Absolute pleasure to be here today. What a privilege. Where are the Standard Bankers? Oh, I love it. Thank you very much. Just a bit of background to me before I get into my presentation. I'm Nigerian. I was born in the UK. Went to high school in Nigeria, university in Botswana, where I was there for about 10 years. Did my master's in Australia for about 10 years. Not the master's itself. And I live in South Africa now since 2012. My lovely wife who's in the audience, she's Zambian, and I think my kid's going to be very confused when it grows up. But the reason I'm saying that is there are two things. One, there's no place like Africa. And thank you. No place like Africa. The second is, there's no better time to be in Africa than now. All right, and now what I want to do is I'll start off with some stats, and let's look at the opportunity. So you guys have heard this. The first stat is Africa would have the largest working population by 2034. To put that in context, it's about 15 years from now. And when you're looking from an innovation point of view, how do we make sure this next generation of Africans are prepared? We can't wait for 2034, 15 years' time to implement solutions. We've got to start now. And in principle, actually, we have about 5 or 7 years to actually do this. The second stat that would be of interest to you guys is that Nigeria will be the third largest country in the world by 2050. When you do the math, about 1 in 4 Africans will be Nigerian. So if you haven't got Nigerian friends, it's a very good time to start having Nigerian friends. And I mentioned this as a tongue-in-cheek because Nigeria as a country can't fail in our continent if 20 or 25% of Africans are Nigerian. The last one I find very interesting, it says that 40% of the world's population by 2010 will be in Africa. That's probably about 80 years from now. And that's probably 3 generations. We won't be here. I definitely won't be here by that time. But the question I ask myself is, what would that generation think of us? What legacies would we leave for them? That's a very important one. That's about 2-3 generations from now. And one of the challenges we have as Africans is we never really talk about what we're doing or what we're promoting our own innovators. And about 4 or 5 years ago, I had a show on Power FM where I featured African innovators from across the continent. And the premise there was to promote and inspire young Africans doing impressive stuff on the continent. I was quite deliberate about the type of innovators I featured. I usually featured 3+ years old, successfully in the country of domicile, regardless of which country they're in, and probably looking to expand. I was quite specific about that, not to discriminate, but I wanted to show we're doing very impressive stuff. And what I'll do is I'll take you through about 4 innovators that I think are doing impressive stuff, and by show of hands, as I go through them, you just tell me if you know of them. MFS Africa, anyone heard of them? One in the front. MFS Africa are a mobile money aggregator. So mobile money is one of the big drivers for financial inclusion on the continent. And what MFS have done, they've plugged in mobile money account across the continent, and they've plugged in 170 million mobile money wallets. Put that in context, that's 15% of Africans connected on their platform today. They're actually based in Johannesburg here, in Braamfontein, but we never talk about them. Another company called MicroInsure out of Kenya. Anyone heard of them? A couple, so very, very few. MicroInsure, I think insurance is a very difficult product to sell on the continent, predominantly because you ask for pay slips, proof of ID, and all that. It's just very difficult. Most Africans don't have that. And what MicroInsure did was say, we know most people buy airtime. Right? On average, you might spend, say, 500 rands, 1,000 rands of airtime. So that means you're getting money from somewhere. So what they do is provide free health insurance on the back of airtime. And they're in 18 countries. I think the last time I checked, it was about 18 countries across the continent. Impressive stuff. Another one called M-Copper out of Kenya, one of my favorite innovators. So M-Copper figured out a way to have pay-as-you-go solar. So what you do is they'll give you the solar panel, and you'd buy sort of maybe 5 rand to 10 rand with solar every day using your phone. And over a period of, say, 12 to 18 months, you pay that off, and you pretty much have solar panels, solar power for free for the rest of your life, at least for as long as the solar panel is working. They're in 400,000 homes in East Africa. How many people know of them? Well, a few more. And the last one, this is a very unique African product, livestock wealth. So I'm relatively educated, but I must admit I don't know much about stocks and bonds. It's very confusing for me. And what these guys have done is to figure out, say, we know Africans, what we understand, not necessarily stocks and bonds, we understand cattle, livestock. I know this for sure, because when I was paying lobola, I had to understand cattle. That's for sure, right? So for those who don't know what lobola is, especially my American friends, that's dowry. And they figured out a way to make cattle an asset class. So you could log online, look at the kraal. If the cattle gives birth to a baby, you can sell it off. And we understand this as Africans, actually based out here in South Africa, but we don't talk about them enough. So we assume we're doing nothing. And what started happening, I started to write about this in my second book, Taking on Silicon Valley. What started happening, the more I met innovators, the more I talked to them in different parts of the continent, I started seeing some themes. I started seeing some innovators we could put together. And I realized we can actually create an ecosystem for Africans that the world's not prepared for. And I'll give you an example. This is a real life example. So let's assume Gogo. She lives in rural Limpopo, for argument's sake. And she's got cataracts. There was an ophthalmologist, an eye doctor, whose name is William Mapham. So he's developed an app called Vula Mobile, based out of Cape Town. And Vula Mobile, what he did, he had this challenge. He would travel 4 hours to see Gogo, travel 4 hours back to his clinic, and then Gogo's got to come 4 hours. It's like, this is just inefficient. So what he did is developed an app called Vula Mobile. So the rural health worker would scan Gogo's eye and pick up using the app that she's got cataracts and immediately book her in to the closest clinic. Now let's assume she's done that using Vula Mobile. She gets booked in for an operation. How does she pay for her operation? In principle, she could use micro-insure. Right? The more airtime, more calls she makes, the more airtime she uses out of Kenya, she can get free health insurance. And she goes, she has the operation, she can see now, and she gets a prescription from the doctor. The doctor says, go buy this. How would she know that the medication is genuine or fake? Which is a genuine problem in the African continent. There's a company out of Ghana called Sproxel. So they've designed a product. You guys remember the scratch and dial when you're recharging your airtime? Yeah, they've put that now on the packaging, and if you SMS with that number, it'll tell you whether it's a genuine product or a fake one. They're in about 4 or 5 countries today. So she could use that and say, oh, this product is genuine. And when she gets home, she can use copper as a lighting mechanism instead of kerosene. And she could use instant money to pay for this product. All right? Out of curiosity, how much do you think this costs Gogo to implement the solution? Show of hands. $10, anyone? $5? It costs Gogo 40 US cents. Everything on here is free if you put these ecosystems together. And one of the things I'm doing, when we talk about exponential technologies from African context, this is exponential. I can guarantee you when Gogo has this implemented for herself, she will think it's exponential technology. And this is the kind of moonshot technology we need to be thinking of as Africans. And so the topic at hand, what would banking then look like? So one of my previous colleagues always used to tell a story. He would say, what's the most important ingredient in coffee? Some people would say it's the bean, some people would say it's the cup or where it's grown, and he would say it's water. All right, water is the most important ingredient in coffee, and you just try drinking coffee without water and you'll understand why. So the same principle applies. Banking, financial services is the most important ingredient in the ecosystem, African innovation ecosystem. And so what is it going to look like? And sometimes we think about banking and we think of the future and we think it's so far away. I'm going to give you about 4 examples to show that banking, what banking looks like in the future is already happening today. So in the banking world, there's something called risk-based pricing. And for those who aren't bankers, it's very simple. It's like, dear Joe, we see you use your card at this shop, and you go to this restaurant, and you fly here, and your salary is X, so we're going to lend you some money. That's risk-based pricing. It's nirvana in the banking world. Let's use one of the Silicon Valley, my favorite innovators out of Silicon Valley, Google. They know everything about you. Right? They know when you're about to have a baby because you do what? You type in pram. They know when you're buying a house, you put BMW or Hyundai. They know when you're buying a car, they know when you're buying a house. So it's not far-fetched for Google to become a bank. It's not far-fetched for them to say, dear Joe, we see you're looking for a BMW. We've negotiated a 20% discount not far off from your home, which is about a kilometer away. And by the way, we've pre-approved you for X amount. Click here, one-click checkout. How many people would do that? I would, absolutely. Compare that to our banking processes for loans today. It could happen today. So I'm not saying Google could become a bank, but that's what banking could look like. Let's use another one. KYC, know your customer. So the principle of KYC, you've got to know who you're dealing with as a customer. You've got to know, normally you'd have the proof of address, the proof of pay slips, and ID. And like for myself, I haven't updated my address for a very long time because it's a very cumbersome process. But with Facebook, and you can actually try this at home. If you go home and log out of your computer or your laptop or your phone, and you try to log in with a brand new computer, something happens. You get an email immediately saying, is this you? You've got to be impressed by that. How does Facebook know where the 2 billion users are at any one time? That's true KYC. Now imagine now if we were to implement such a technology on our mobile apps to say, dear Joe, we see you park, we turn on location services on your app, and we see you park at this location every day. The address is very different to what we've got in the system. Are you happy for us to update this? I'll do that, right? As opposed to having to go into the bank to update your address. Let's use another example. Truecaller. How many people know Truecaller? Oh, this is good. Normally it's about 50%. For those who don't know Truecaller, it's a fintech out of Sweden that's developed an app that can sort of block off all the unsolicited calls. As of today, or definitely in the past 12 to 18 months, I can tell you Truecaller has blocked a major telco operator. Here, it comes up as spam. The bank, when they call you, comes up as spam. A voicemail service for a major telco comes up as spam. You could be impressed. How did a small fintech out of Sweden figure out how to block large multinationals? And what do we do in our call centers? We worry about the handling time. We worry about how long the customer was on the phone. Meanwhile, on the front end, we're not getting through, right? We're being blocked. And even with the iPhone iOS now, if you notice in the new update, there's an SMS junk function there, and most SMSs from the major corporations come up as junk. Very impressive when you think about it. And the last one is WhatsApp remittances. So WhatsApp, and this is very close to me because it's a project I'm working on with the bank. So WhatsApp launching remittances product in India, so where you can actually send money across probably borders using WhatsApp. And just out of curiosity, I have a question here. Has anyone ever called the call centers for any of these fintechs? One? Anyone called Google's call center? Why? Because it absolutely just works. And we don't wake up in the morning and say we want to call the bank, right? We should say we want to provide services to our customers where they don't need to call us, right? And that's what banking in the future should look like. Banking in a cashless environment is already here, but the problem is we're looking at it very differently. And this is very nice when we think about it, but let's talk about it in an African context. What should African banking look like with this in mind? I'll talk about a project I'm working on the remittances space. And I've always been an African diaspora. I've moved, like I said, I've been in 5 countries. And the challenge is the same. It doesn't matter which country you're in. For African diaspora, it's very, very difficult to send money home. But when I move, I have my WhatsApp profile. I keep it, right, typically. Maybe a few months later, I might change the number, but I keep the WhatsApp profile. And I keep my email address, I don't change it. My social media profile remains the same. And I ask myself a very hard question. Why can't I keep my bank account? We never thought about this. And when you look at the stats today, there are roughly 100 million foreign nationals or African diaspora in the continent who have this problem. In context, that's about 2 South Africans out there who cannot typically send money home or struggle when they come back home. They've got to start it from scratch. So we think, this is from a Standard Bank perspective, we say, let's try and answer this question. And I want to show some of the stats to give you some context. Last year, there was about $69 billion remitted into the continent. That's a lot of money. Of that, 22.3 billion remitted into Nigeria. Remember when I told you 1 in 4? All right, that's the stats there. And when you combine that and you compare it with the bottom 5 countries in Africa, that's larger than the GDP. In Nigerian terms, $22.3 billion is about 5% of their GDP. So it's a huge asset, right? And about, for most African countries, we are charged roughly 10% to send money, over 10%. It's very expensive to send money across borders. In certain instances, 20 or the north of 25%. Very difficult. And the question you ask here is, how do we start to make remittances an asset for the continent? And the phases we're going through, the first one is to make sure we have the corridors in play. And we've launched in 4 countries, in Europe, into Nigeria. We've tested that over the past few years. And the second phase of what we're doing now is to now start enabling people to have that bank account across the borders I was talking about. And we've tested that about 2 weeks ago, and hopefully for the next few years, we will have that rolled out and tested across multiple countries. That's very impressive. And this is the part, by the way, you've got to clap. I'll be cheeky. But the point here I'm trying to make is sometimes we think about banking or we think banking in the future, we think of it so far away. We've heard a lot of talk around artificial intelligence. We see people taste with sight. And we think it's so far away, and then sometimes we feel like we can't do anything. And most of you here in the corporate space, you actually have the power to do impressive stuff. Right? And this is a very important point for me. There is no miracle generation who is going to disrupt Africa. It's us in this room. It's our legacy that would be lived on after we pass on. And one of the things that I've been bothering and sort of trying to figure out for a very long time is, what does it mean to disrupt Africa? And if you follow me in social media, I'm always talking about African innovation, disrupting Africa, nice. And it's Nnamdi, I say to myself, Nnamdi, it's cute. You go to conferences, you do a hashtag and put it on Instagram, but what does that mean? That's cute, but it doesn't add much value. How do we tangibly disrupt Africa? And how do we know we've succeeded as a generation? And I had to look deep into my inner self here, my inner nerd rather, to say, look for solutions on how to measure that we're disrupting Africa, measure that we're moving forward. And I came across the diffusion innovation theory a few years back. And by the way, anyone who's in marketing or trying to launch tech, you need to know about this theory. It's a very impressive one. And the principle is quite simple. And I also have an exponential slide like most Singularity presenters. So the principle is quite simple. Let's say you're launching the iPhone 8 or the Samsung, whatever product it is. The principle says, if you're trying to target, say, 1 million people, you've got to get to a tipping point, a critical mass of about roughly 15%. So 15% of people need to use your product. It can vary between 13.5% and say 18%, but about 15% is about right. And those people are the people who just love your product. Like, I'm one of those. Like, when the Apple comes up, iPhone 7 comes out, I'm just going to buy it. There's no real rationale. I just love the product, right? And that's about 15%. You've got to get to that. And then after that, there's a subset. There's a subset here called the innovators. About 2.5% of these people need to be fanatical about your product. And these people are the ones who stand in the queue at 12 midnight and camping out to get the iPhone when they can actually buy it the next day for probably half the price. They're just fanatical about the product. And I thought to myself, if we apply this theory to Africa, can we tangibly disrupt the continent? I say, yeah, let's try it out. So there are about 1.2 billion people on the continent today. And about 15% of that, about 200 million Africans. We're going to say there are 200 million Africans who are just passionate about the continent. Nnamdi, why did you come back to, say, Africa when you could live in Australia? Why are you staying here despite all the challenge? I don't know. I just love the continent, right? You've got to be passionate, patriotic about it. We have about 200 million odd people. And it's 2.5 are those fanatics about the continent who just want to make things better. Most innovators fall in this category. They launch products that are forward-thinking, who want to move the continent forward. About 2.5% of these innovators we need, and that's, I think, a few million. And I have a theory that there's a subset. There's a subset here. There's a theory that I've been cracking my head about. There's a theory I want to call these guys visionaries. These are people who have generational visions. So they're like, not about this generation, it's about the next and the next and the next, and how do we leave a legacy? And when you do the math and the modeling, the number of visionaries we need for the continent to disrupt Africa is 17. And that's a very small number when you think about it. We just need 17 people with bold enough visions to move Africa forward. And so far, I've only come across one. And my life mission is to dedicate myself to finding those 17. Because when we find them, our job as a continent is to roll out the red carpet and make it easier for them, because we can't afford for them to spend 10, 15 years trying to figure this out when we could do it in a shorter space of time. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I want to say thank you so much for having me here today, and hope we can disrupt Africa together.